Story 1. The Basement Shift. I've worked in hospitals for 15 years, and I can tell you right now that there are floors in these buildings that don't exist on any official blueprint. Sarah Chen found that out the hard way during her first week in the laundry department at St. Margaret's Medical Center. The job posting seemed straightforward enough. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Processing surgical linens and patient gowns in the basement level. The pay was $23 an hour, which was almost double what the day shift made, but Sarah needed the money for her student loans, and she didn't mind working alone. The interview lasted maybe 10 minutes. The facilities manager, a tired-looking man named Gerald, barely made eye contact as he slid the paperwork across his desk. He did mention one thing that stuck with her, though. He said the turnover rate was high, but that was normal for overnight positions. People's sleep schedules just couldn't adjust, he explained. Sarah nodded and signed on the dotted line. Her first shift started on a Tuesday. The hospital basement was accessed through a service elevator at the far end of the parking garage, away from where visitors and patients entered. Sarah had to badge in 3 separate times just to reach the laundry room itself. The elevator descended with a mechanical groan that seemed to last forever, and when the doors finally opened, she stepped into a hallway painted that specific shade of institutional beige that somehow made the fluorescent lights seem dimmer than they should be. The air smelled like industrial detergent mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify, something organic and stale. The laundry room itself was massive. Rows of commercial washers and dryers lined both walls, each machine the size of a compact car. In the center of the room sat a large folding station with industrial presses for the surgical linens. Sarah's job was simple: process the bins of soiled laundry that came down throughout the night, run them through the machines using specific protocols for different contamination levels, dry them, fold them, and sort them into clean bins for morning pickup. So Gerald had left her a laminated instruction sheet and a radio clipped to her belt, set to channel 3 in case she needed to reach security. The first 3 nights passed without incident. Sarah fell into a rhythm. She'd start by processing the surgical linens first, since those had the strictest turnaround requirements, then move on to the patient gowns and bedding. She listened to podcasts on her earbuds to pass the time, though she kept the volume low enough to hear if any machinery malfunctioned. The work was monotonous but not difficult, and she appreciated the solitude after spending her days dealing with her demanding roommate and packed subway cars. It was during her 4th shift that she first noticed something odd. Around 2:30 in the morning, she was transferring a load of bed sheets from washer to dryer when she heard footsteps above her head. Not the distant sounds of people walking several floors up, but footsteps directly above her, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the room immediately overhead. The steps were heavy and deliberate, heel-toe, with a rhythm that suggested someone deep in thought or perhaps agitated. Sarah paused, one hand still gripping a damp sheet, and looked up at the ceiling. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds before stopping abruptly. She keyed the radio. "Security. This is Sarah in basement laundry. Is there supposed to be anyone on the floor directly above me?" Static crackled before a voice responded. "Basement laundry? Hold on, let me check the layout." More static. Longer this time. Sarah. According to the blueprint I'm looking at, there's no floor between your location and ground level. You're directly under the main lobby. Must be sound traveling weird through the ventilation or something. Sarah thanked him and went back to work. But the explanation didn't sit right with her. Those footsteps had been too clear, too close. Sound didn't travel that way through ductwork. But she pushed the thought aside and focused on folding the mountain of surgical gowns that had just come out of the dryer. The following night, it happened again. Same time, 2:30 a.m., same pacing footsteps directly overhead. This time, Sarah was certain. She stood perfectly still beneath the spot where the sound was loudest and listened. The footsteps would pause occasionally, and during one of those pauses, she heard something else. A sound like furniture being dragged across a floor, just once. A heavy scraping that made her teeth ache. Then silence. She didn't call security this time. Instead, she pulled up the hospital's website on her phone and navigated to the building directory. Ground floor, lobby, admissions, gift shop, cafeteria, basement level 1, laundry services, morgue, maintenance, no basement level 2, as no sub-basement, nothing between where she stood and the marble floors of the lobby above. She zoomed in on the architectural rendering of the building. The spacing looked wrong, actually. There appeared to be more vertical distance between the basement ceiling and the ground floor than there should be, but it could have been just the way the diagram was drawn. During her break at 4 a.m., Sarah did something she probably shouldn't have. She took the service elevator up to the ground floor and walked through the empty lobby. Her footsteps echoed on the polished tile. She found the spot that should have been directly above her workstation and stood there, looking down. Just floor. Solid floor. She walked to the main elevator bank and checked the buttons. Lobby, floors 2 through 7. Basement. Nothing else. She pressed the basement button and rode down, counting seconds. The descent took 8 seconds. When she rode back up, it took 7. That second of difference nagged at her. Back in the laundry room, Sarah measured the ceiling height with her eyes. 12 feet, maybe 13, including the ductwork and pipes. Standard for an industrial space. But when she'd been standing in the lobby, the ceiling there had to have been at least 15 feet high. Those grand medical center ceilings meant to make the space feel open and welcoming. Even accounting for the structural floor supports, the math didn't work. When there was space missing. At least 10 feet of vertical space that existed somewhere between where she stood and where the lobby began. The next incident happened on her 8th night. Sarah had just started her shift and was sorting through the first bin of soiled linens when she noticed a patient gown that didn't belong. It was sitting on top of the clean, folded pile she'd prepared the previous night. The gown was covered in dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood, but that wasn't what made her freeze. It was the style of the gown itself. The hospital had updated to a new design 3 years ago, modern wraps with Velcro closures and a small printed logo. This gown was the old style, the kind with cloth ties and no branding. More than that, the fabric felt different, thicker. The weave was coarser, like something from decades ago. Sarah checked the timestamp on the bin it supposedly came from. The bin had been sent down at 11:45 p.m., just before her shift. But she distinctly remembered finishing all the sorting the night before and leaving the clean pile covered with a sheet, standard protocol. Someone or something had placed this gown there in the 15 minutes between when the day shift supervisor left and when Sarah arrived. She should have thrown it in with the next contaminated load. Instead, she found herself examining it more closely. The stains were definitely blood, but they'd oxidized to a brown-black color that suggested age, months, maybe years. And there was a smell coming from the fabric, faint but unmistakable. Formaldehyde, the chemical used in embalming and, more relevant to hospitals, in preserving tissue samples. But why would a patient gown smell like formaldehyde? Sarah looked around the empty laundry room, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. One of the dryers tumbled in its cycle, the rhythmic thumping the only sound besides her own breathing. She folded the gown carefully and set it aside, making a mental note to ask Gerald about it in the morning. But by the time her shift ended at 7 a.m., she'd found 3 more of the old-style gowns mixed in with the clean laundry. Each one stained, each one smelling of formaldehyde, each one appearing in piles she'd personally processed and folded. It was impossible. She'd been in the room the entire shift. Nobody had come down. The elevator required badge access, and her radio would have alerted her if security needed to deliver something. Yet there they were, 4 gowns that shouldn't exist, appearing like someone was deliberately placing them for her to find. On her 9th night, Sarah decided to set up her phone to record while she worked. She positioned it on top of one of the dryers, angled to capture the entire sorting area and the elevator doors. If something was happening, she wanted proof. The shift started normally enough. She processed the contaminated bins, ran the loads, folded and sorted. At 2:30 a.m., right on schedule, the footsteps started above her head. Sarah grabbed her phone and recorded the ceiling, capturing the clear sound of someone pacing. The recording would prove she wasn't imagining things. At 3:15 a.m., while she was loading a dryer, she heard a sound she'd never heard before, a soft ding, like an elevator arriving. But not from the service elevator she used. It came from behind her, from the direction of the far wall where nothing but storage shelves stood. Sarah spun around, and her blood went cold. There was another elevator there. Not the service elevator with its industrial metal doors, but an older passenger elevator with brass doors that had somehow appeared in a wall she'd walked past 100 times. The doors stood open, so revealing an empty car with wood paneling and a floor indicator that showed only two options, B2 and ISO. Sarah's hand trembled as she raised her phone, making sure the camera was still recording. She approached the elevator slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run. The car was immaculate, not a speck of dust, as if it had been in constant use. But that was impossible. This elevator didn't exist. She'd studied the blueprints, walked every inch of this basement. There was no second elevator. Something made her look at the wall beside the brass doors. There was a plaque there, tarnished with age. St. Margaret's Psychiatric Hospital, Isolation Ward, 1952. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. She knew the building's history. St. Margaret's Medical Center had been built in 1987 on the site of the old psychiatric hospital, which had been demolished after decades of scandal and neglect. But demolished meant gone. Razed. Nothing left. Yet here was an elevator from that old building, functioning, waiting. The brass doors began to close with a smooth, mechanical precision. Sarah stumbled backward, and in that moment of movement, she saw something that made her heart stop. There was someone in the elevator. She'd thought it was empty, but standing in the far corner, partially hidden in shadow, was a figure in one of those old-style patient gowns. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her, and just stood there as the doors sealed shut with a final decisive click. And then the entire elevator was gone. Not closed, not hidden, but completely vanished, leaving only the storage shelves and bare wall that had always been there. Sarah ran to the service elevator and slammed her badge against the reader. Nothing happened. She tried again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the card. The reader blinked red. Denied. She was locked in. The radio. She grabbed it from her belt and keyed the button. Security. I need someone in basement laundry right now. My badge isn't working and I need out of here immediately. Only static answered her. She tried again. Nothing. The radio was dead, or the signal wasn't reaching through whatever was happening around her. Sarah looked at her phone. No signal, which shouldn't have been possible this close to ground level. The time on her screen read 3:33 a.m. The footsteps above her head started again. But this time they were different. Instead of pacing, they were running. Heavy, frantic running back and forth, accompanied by other sounds. Voices, muffled, but clearly multiple people, shouting something she couldn't make out. Then screaming. High-pitched, terrified screaming that went on and on before cutting off abruptly. Sarah pressed her hands over her ears, but the sounds seemed to be coming from inside the walls now, all around her. Then she saw them. The patient gowns. They were appearing on the clean sorting table one by one, materializing out of thin air. Old style, all of them, each more stained than the last. Not just blood now, other fluids, other evidence of human suffering. And they kept coming, dozens of them, piling up faster than gravity should allow, until they spilled onto the floor in a heap of fouled fabric. Sarah's phone chimed. Impossible, with no signal. But it chimed. A notification. She looked at the screen through tears she didn't remember starting to cry. It was a calendar alert. Hospital staff meeting, it read. The date shown was March 15th, 1952. Below that, another notification appeared, this one a message from an unknown number. We've been waiting for someone to notice. The lights went out. Complete darkness for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. When they flickered back on, Sarah was no longer alone in the laundry room. Standing between her and the service elevator was a woman in a nurse's uniform from another era. White dress, white cap, white shoes, all pristine except for the dark stains covering her hands and forearms. The woman's face was pale, hollow-cheeked, with eyes that held an exhaustion Sarah had never seen in a living person. You work here now. the woman said, her voice like dry leaves. In the basement where they kept them, where they tried to hide what they did to us. To the patients. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat had closed. The nurse took a step forward. This isn't the hospital's first basement, dear. They built over us, but they didn't get rid of us. We're still here, still doing our shifts, still watching over the ones they tortured in the name of treatment. And now you've seen us. Now you know we're here. More figures appeared behind the nurse. Patients in those old gowns, some standing, some sitting on the floor in positions that suggested restraints Sarah couldn't see. They didn't look angry or menacing. They looked tired, lost, forgotten. You have a choice, the nurse continued. You can finish your shift and leave, and you'll never remember any of this. The hospital makes sure of that. The reason the turnover is so high? People feel it, this place, what's underneath. They quit without knowing why, or... She paused. You can remember. You can tell people what happened here. But if you remember, you'll carry us with you. You'll always know we're down here, still suffering, still waiting for someone to acknowledge what was done. Sarah found her voice. What happened to you? The nurse smiled sadly. Insulin shock therapy, ice baths, lobotomies performed in rooms without proper equipment. They called it treatment. They called the isolation ward therapeutic. 23 patients died in this basement level between 1948 and 1952. And 23 people whose families were told they'd been transferred to other facilities. We were buried in the woods behind the building. When they demolished the hospital, they paved over our graves for the parking lot. The service elevator dinged. The doors opened. The car was empty, waiting. Sarah looked at the nurse, at the patients behind her, at the mountain of stained gowns that represented decades of hidden suffering. She looked at her phone, still recording, documenting everything. I'll remember, Sarah said. I'll tell them. The nurse nodded once. As Sarah stepped into the elevator, she turned back to see the basement laundry room fading, revealing the space beneath it, the real basement level that existed in a place between floors. She saw beds with restraints, medical equipment from another age, walls marked with scratches from desperate fingers, and she saw the 23 people who'd died there, still wandering, still trapped in their final moments, waiting for someone to give their suffering a voice. The elevator doors closed. When they opened on the ground floor, it was 7 a.m. The morning shift supervisor was waiting there, looking impatient. You're late badging out. Everything okay down there? Sarah checked her phone. The recording was still there, all 6 hours of it. She could see the timestamp where the brass elevator appeared, where the nurse spoke to her. Proof. Evidence. I need to speak to someone about the building's history, Sarah said, about what was here before the medical center. The supervisor's expression changed, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. We don't really discuss the previous facility. Company policy. Look, why don't you take a few days off? Night shift can be disorienting when you're not used to it. But Sarah was already walking toward the hospital's administrative offices, now her phone gripped tight in her hand. She'd made a promise to 23 people who'd been forgotten by history, and she intended to keep it. Behind her, she could hear it. The faint sound of footsteps from the basement level that didn't officially exist, still pacing, still waiting. But maybe, just maybe, not alone anymore. The last thing Sarah Chen learned about working the night shift at St. Margaret's Medical Center? Sometimes the reason they pay you double is because you're not just working with the living. Story 2. Gas Station Rule. Book $23 an hour to sit in a gas station booth and ring up cigarettes and energy drinks seemed like the easiest money Mike Torres would ever make. The Crossroads Express sat at the junction of Interstate 40 and State Route 66. One of those places that exists purely because truckers need somewhere to fuel up between actual destinations. Mike took the midnight to 8 a.m. shift because it fit his class schedule at the community college and because, frankly, he needed every penny he could get after his dad's medical bills started piling up. His manager, a heavyset guy named Dennis who looked like he'd aged a decade for every year he'd worked at the Crossroads, gave him the tour on a Tuesday evening. The store itself was larger than it appeared from the highway, with 6 aisles of road trip essentials, a walk-in cooler for beer and soda, a coffee station that Dennis claimed to clean twice daily but clearly didn't, and a register system that had probably been cutting edge in 1995. The gas pumps outside were pay-at-the-pump capable, but Dennis explained that the overnight shift still required someone inside in case the readers malfunctioned or if customers wanted to pay cash. "You'll mostly be alone out here," Dennis said, his keys jangling as he walked Mike through the back room where inventory was stored. "Weeknights are dead. You might see a truck every hour, couple of cars. Weekends pick up a little, especially Friday and Saturday when people are driving through. You got the panic button under the counter if anyone tries anything stupid, and the police station is only 11 miles up Route 66. So response time is pretty quick." Then Dennis opened a drawer behind the register and pulled out a laminated piece of paper covered in handwritten rules. The title read, "Overnight Shift Protocol. Follow exactly." Mike almost laughed. It looked like something from one of those creepy pasta stories his roommate was always reading. "I know how it looks," Dennis said, not smiling. "But previous overnight guys who didn't follow these rules quit really fast, or..." He paused. "Just read it and do what it says, okay? Especially the part about customer 12. Mike scanned the list. Some rules made sense in a corporate policy way. Lock bathroom at closing if no customers present. Count register at 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Check cooler temperature every hour. But others were bizarre. If register drawer opens by itself, place exactly $1 bill inside and close it immediately. Never look directly at customer 12. Process transaction while looking at the register screen only. If you hear knocking from the walk-in cooler after 3 a.m., do not investigate until sunrise." "This is a joke, right?" Mike said. "Like hazing the new guy?" Dennis looked at him with an expression Mike couldn't quite read. "The owner is particular about how things are done. Just follow the rules, take home your pay, and don't ask questions. The last kid who thought he was too smart to follow protocol, he lasted 4 shifts." Dennis dropped the keys to the store in Mike's hand. "Your first solo shift is tomorrow night. Good luck." Mike's first 3 nights passed in mind-numbing boredom. He sold exactly 12 transactions on Wednesday night, 8 on Thursday, and 15 on Friday, when a couple of truckers came through within an hour of each other. He counted the register at the required times, checked the cooler temperature, and scrolled through his phone whenever business was slow. The rule list sat next to the register, and Mike glanced at it occasionally with amusement. Customer 12. What kind of stupid rule was that? How would he even know which customer was number 12? His 4th shift, Saturday night rolling into Sunday morning, answered that question. The evening started busy by Crossroads standards, and Mike processed transactions for maybe 20 different customers between midnight and 1:30 a.m. Truckers mostly, grabbing coffee and snacks. A family in an SUV with sleeping kids in the back seat, Dad looking exhausted as he paid for gas. A woman in her 60s who bought 3 scratch-off lottery tickets and didn't say a single word. At 1:45 a.m., the store emptied out. Mike was restocking cigarettes behind the counter when he heard the bell above the door chime. He looked up to see an elderly woman entering. She wore a long dress that seemed formal for a highway gas station at this hour, dark blue with a pattern he couldn't quite make out in the fluorescent lighting. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she moved with careful, deliberate steps toward the coffee station. Mike went back to restocking, keeping an eye on her the way Dennis had taught him to monitor all customers. Loss prevention, he'd called it. The woman poured coffee into a large cup, added cream and sugar, then walked to the cooler section. Mike watched her reflection in the security mirror mounted in the corner. Something about her movement seemed off, too smooth, like she was gliding rather than walking. She selected a packaged sandwich and a bottle of water, then approached the counter. "Will this be all?" Mike asked, scanning the items. The woman nodded. Her hands, when she reached for her purse, looked wrong. It took Mike a second to process what he was seeing, and when he did, his stomach dropped. Her hands were on backwards. The thumbs were on the outside edges, the fingers curling in a direction that shouldn't have been anatomically possible. He must have stared too long because the woman smiled at him, revealing teeth that were just slightly too white. too perfect, too many. 749, Mike managed, his voice cracking. The woman paid with exact change, and coins that felt ice cold when they dropped into his palm. She collected her items in a paper bag and walked back toward the door, those gliding steps carrying her across the linoleum without making a sound. As she reached the exit, she paused and turned back. "See you soon," she said, her voice like wind through a tunnel. The bell chimed as she left. Mike stood frozen, his heart hammering. He looked at the register screen. Customer 12, it read at the top of the receipt. Done transaction number 12 of the night. Customer 12. The rule list suddenly seemed a lot less funny. Mike pulled out his phone and texted Dennis. "Weird customer just left. Older woman, backwards hands." He sent it and stared at the screen, waiting for a response. None came. Dennis was probably asleep. It was almost 2 a.m. Mike tried to convince himself he'd imagined the hands, that the fluorescent lights in late hour had played tricks on his eyes. But he could still feel the cold of those coins in his palm. At 2 a.m. exactly, the register drawer popped open by itself. Mike jumped back from the counter, his chair squealing against the floor. The drawer sat there, cash neatly organized in its slots, waiting. He remembered the rule. If register drawer opens by itself, place exactly $1 bill inside and close it immediately. Mike's rational mind screamed that this was absurd, that drawers didn't open by themselves, that someone was messing with him. But his hands were already reaching for his wallet, pulling out a $1 bill, placing it in the drawer next to the other cash. As soon as he pushed the drawer closed, the lights flickered. Just once, a brief dip to brown-out levels before returning to full brightness. His phone remained silent. No response from Dennis. Mike pulled up the group chat with his college friends and almost sent a message about what was happening. But something stopped him. How would he even explain it? He was seeing things, following weird rules written on a laminated card, paying a register like it was some kind of supernatural vending machine. They'd think he was losing it. The next 4 hours crawled by. Mike processed 3 more transactions, none of them unusual. Just regular people buying regular things. He counted the register again at 4 a.m. per the protocol, finding everything balanced, including the extra $1 he'd added. At 4:30, he heard it. A knock from inside the walk-in cooler. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like someone rapping their knuckles against the metal door from within. Mike stared at the cooler door in the back section of the store. The rule was clear. If you hear knocking from the walk-in cooler after 3 a.m., do not investigate until sunrise. The knocking came again. 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same intensity. Mike's legs wanted to carry him over there, and to open the door and prove it was just the cooling system or settling shelves or any logical explanation. But he remembered Dennis's expression, the way he'd said the last guy only lasted 4 shifts. Mike stayed behind the counter, every muscle tensed, and listened as the knocking continued at irregular intervals until 5 a.m., when it finally stopped. Sunrise came at 6:20 that morning. At 6:30, Mike finally mustered the courage to approach the walk-in cooler. His hand shook as he pulled the handle. The door swung open, revealing rows of soda, beer, and refrigerated sandwiches. Everything looked normal. Everything was exactly where it should be. No explanation for the knocking, no sign that anyone or anything had been inside. Mike let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and closed the door. His shift ended at 8 a.m. Dennis arrived at 7:45, looking at Mike with an expression that might have been sympathy. "How was it?" he asked. "I followed the rules," Mike said, not elaborating. Dennis nodded, seemingly satisfied. Mike drove home as the sun climbed higher, trying to process the night's events. By the time he reached his apartment, he'd almost convinced himself it had been stress, lack of sleep, the weird isolation of working alone in the middle of nowhere. He'd go back for his next shift, prove to himself it was all in his head, and collect his paycheck like a normal person. His second week started on Wednesday. The shifts, Tuesday and Wednesday, passed without incident, almost boring in their normalcy. Mike began to relax. Maybe the first week had been a fluke. Maybe Dennis had staged something to mess with him. By Thursday night, he'd stopped even reading the rule list. He knew it by memory now, and most of it seemed like standard closing procedures dressed up in spooky language. Thursday night at 1:53 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. Mike looked up from his phone to see the same elderly woman entering the store. Customer 12. She wore the same dark blue dress, moved with the same gliding steps, headed straight for the coffee station. Mike's throat went dry. The rules said never look directly at her. Process the transaction while looking only at the register screen. But he couldn't help himself. He watched her pour coffee, watched those backwards hands grip the cup, watched her select the same sandwich and water as before. She approached the counter. Mike forced his eyes down to the register screen, but in his peripheral vision he could see her standing there, could sense her watching him. "Will this be all?" he asked, scanning the items without looking up. Silence. He could feel her staring at him, waiting. Mike glanced up for just a second, meeting her eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, reflecting the fluorescent lights like polished stones. She smiled that too-many-teeth smile. "I said we'd see each other soon," she whispered. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls, from inside Mike's own head. "You're learning the rules. Good. But rules only protect you if you follow them completely." She placed exact change on the counter again. Mike swept the coins into his hand without looking at them, his eyes locked back on the screen. 7.49, just like before. He gave her the receipt and the bag, and she left without another word. The moment the door closed, Mike grabbed his phone and called Dennis. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. He called again. Same result. He sent a text. She came back. Customer 12 came back. What is she? What the hell is going on here? The message showed as delivered but not read. Mike was alone with this, whatever this was. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, the bathroom door, which Mike had locked at midnight per protocol, swung open. He heard it from behind the counter, the distinctive creak of the old hinges. Mike's whole body went cold. The rule didn't say anything about the bathroom unlocking itself. It just said to keep it locked if no customers were present. But the door was definitely open now. He could see it from his position at the register, hanging ajar, darkness visible beyond. Something moved in that darkness. A figure, tall and thin, standing just out of sight inside the bathroom. Mike couldn't see details. Just a silhouette that seemed wrong in proportions, too tall for the door frame, limbs too long. The figure didn't emerge. It just stood there, swaying slightly, like it was waiting for Mike to approach, like it was an invitation or a test. Mike stayed frozen behind the counter. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, time becoming elastic in his fear. Then, slowly, the bathroom door swung shut. The lock clicked. Whatever had been inside was either gone or contained again. Mike didn't move from his spot until the sun rose. Dennis was waiting when Mike's shift ended Friday morning. "We need to talk," Dennis said, his expression grave. He led Mike to the back room, away from the arriving day shift cashier. "Customer 12 showed up twice this week, and you looked at her the second time." "How do you know that?" Mike demanded. "Are there cameras I don't know about?" "The owner knows," Dennis said. "He always knows when the rules get broken." "Look, Mike, you're a good worker and you need this job. I get it. But you need to understand something. This place isn't just a gas station. It's a crossroads, literally, and in other ways. Things pass through here that are traveling between places that aren't on any map. Most of the time, they just want to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Buy their coffee, get their gas, move on. The rules exist to keep that illusion going, to keep you safe while they're here." "That's insane," Mike said. "You're telling me we're serving supernatural customers, and the owner knows about it? Why doesn't he just close the place?" Dennis laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Close it. This place has been here since 1952. Different owners, same location, same rules. You can't close a crossroads, Mike. You can only decide whether to work here or not. The pay is good because most people can't handle knowing what they're dealing with. The ones who follow the rules do fine. The ones who don't." He trailed off. "What happens to the ones who don't? The last overnight guy before you? He decided the rules were stupid, refused to lock the bathroom, refused to pay the register, refused to look away from customer 12. He lasted 4 shifts, like I told you. On his 5th night, we found his car in the parking lot the next morning. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat, coffee still warm in the cup holder, but no sign of him. Police searched for 2 weeks. Never found a trace." Mike felt sick. "And you're okay with this? Just accepting that things like this happen?" "I work day shift," Dennis said quietly. "I stock shelves and do paperwork and go home to my family. The night is different, Mike. Always has been. You can keep the overnight shift and follow the rules, or you can quit right now and I'll find someone else. But if you stay, you follow every single rule, every single night, no exceptions. Understood?" Mike thought about his dad's medical bills, about his tuition, about how hard it would be to find another job that paid this well and fit his schedule. He thought about customer 12's black eyes and backwards hands, about the thing in the bathroom, about the knocking from inside a locked cooler. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. "I'll stay," he heard himself say. "I'll follow the rules." Over the next 3 weeks, Mike became an expert in the Crossroads Express overnight protocols. He learned the subtle signs that preceded weird events. The temperature would drop about 5 degrees 10 minutes before customer 12 arrived. The fluorescent lights would buzz at a frequency just below human hearing before the register drawer opened itself. The coffee pot would stop mid-brew exactly 30 seconds before the cooler knocking started. He developed a routine that kept him safe and sane. Eyes down for certain customers, dollar bills ready for the register, bathroom locked and never investigated, cooler sounds ignored until sunrise. He saw customer 12 4 more times, always buying the same items, always appearing as transaction number 12, always leaving with that promise. "See you soon." He saw other things too. A trucker whose reflection in the security mirror showed something with antlers instead of a head. A family of 4 who all had the exact same face, down to identical moles on their left cheeks. A man in a business suit who left wet footprints despite the cloudless night, footprints that steamed and evaporated within seconds. Mike stopped texting Dennis about it, stopped talking about the job with his friends and family. When people asked how work was going, he said, "Fine, quiet, boring," and changed the subject. The money was good. The rules kept him safe. That was enough. He could compartmentalize, treat the overnight shift like a strange dream that ended when the sun rose. His 7th week, Friday night into Saturday morning, everything changed. The shift started normally. Mike went through his routine, checked the coffee station, verified the bathroom lock, counted the register at 2 a.m. No customer 12 showed up during her usual window. No weird incidents at all. It was, by Crossroads standards, a completely ordinary night. And Mike began to think he might actually make it through a shift without anything supernatural happening. At 6 a.m., 1 hour before the end of his shift, a car pulled up to the pumps. Mike watched on the monitor as a young woman, maybe 25, stepped out and began fueling. Normal transaction. Probably pay at the pump. Nothing unusual. But as the woman finished fueling, Mike saw something that made his blood freeze. Behind her, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, stood customer 12. And just standing there, 20 feet back, watching, the young woman didn't seem to notice her. She replaced the fuel nozzle and headed toward the store entrance. The bell chimed. The woman walked in, offering Mike a tired smile. "Just paying for pump 3, she said, "and maybe some coffee if it's fresh." Behind her, through the glass door, Mike could see customer 12 gliding across the parking lot, heading toward the entrance. She was coming inside. But the rule only applied when she was customer 12, transaction number 12. Mike had already processed 8 transactions tonight. This woman would be number 9. Customer 12 would be number 13. The elderly woman reached the door. Mike watched in horror as those backwards hands pushed it open. The bell chimed again. The young woman at the counter didn't turn around, didn't react, seemed completely unaware that someone else had entered. Customer 12 glided past her, and so close their shoulders should have touched. but the young woman showed no sign of noticing. The elderly woman positioned herself directly behind the younger one, mimicking her posture, her stance, like a predator studying prey. Then customer 12 looked directly at Mike and placed one backwards finger to her lips. Shh. A warning. Or a test. Mike processed the young woman's payment with shaking hands, willing himself to act normal. "Have a good morning," he managed to say. The woman thanked him and left, the bell chiming as she exited. Customer 12 remained standing at the counter. "She didn't see me," the elderly woman said conversationally. "Very few of them do anymore. But you see me, don't you, Michael?" She'd never used his name before. Mike kept his eyes fixed on the register screen, following the rule, his heart hammering. "You've been very good at following the rules, better than the others. Do you know why the rules work?" Mike didn't answer, didn't move. Customer 12 continued, her voice taking on a quality like wind through dead trees. "They work because belief is a barrier. When you follow the rules, you acknowledge what you're dealing with, and that acknowledgement creates a boundary we cannot cross. But when someone breaks the rules, when they insist that their rational world is the only world, they remove the barrier. They invite us in." She placed items on the counter. The same coffee, sandwich, and water as always. "Ring me up, Michael. Transaction number 12, just like it should be." "You're transaction 13 tonight," Mike said, his voice barely a whisper. "Am I?" Customer 12 smiled. "Look at the screen." Mike glanced down. Transaction number 12 blinked on the display. But that was impossible. He'd counted 9 transactions before this one. Unless... Mike's mind raced. He'd counted 8 transactions between midnight and 6 a.m. But his shift started at midnight. The shift started at midnight. But the count started at closing, which was 11 p.m. Dennis always processed a few final customers before locking up. Those would have been transactions 1 through 3. Mike's first customer had been transaction 4. His 9th customer had been transaction 12. And customer 12 had been waiting for that exact moment. "You're learning," she said, pleased. "The rules are precise for a reason. Now ring me up so I can leave and we'll see each other again next week." "You're becoming quite skilled at this dance, Michael. The owner is pleased." Mike scanned the items, his hands moving automatically. $7.49. Exact change appeared on the counter. He swept it into the register without touching her backwards hands and gave her the receipt. Customer 12 collected her bag and glided toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. "A warning, since you've been so good. Someone new is coming to work the overnight shift with you. Dennis will tell you tomorrow that the owner wants coverage on the busiest nights. This person will not believe the rules. They will break them. When that happens, stay behind the counter. Do not try to help them. Do not interfere. Do you understand?" Mike nodded, still not looking directly at her. Customer 12 left, the bell chiming her departure. Mike stood alone in the Crossroads Express as the sun began to rise, wondering what he'd gotten himself into and knowing deep down that it was far too late to get out. Dennis called him at 3 p.m. that afternoon. "Owner wants to add someone to overnight on Fridays and Saturdays. Girl named Ashley. Starts next week. You'll train her on the rules. Make sure she understands how important they are." Mike knew, even before meeting Ashley, that she wouldn't believe. Some people couldn't. And when Friday night came and customer 12 walked through that door for transaction number 12, Ashley would look directly at her, would question the rules, would break the boundary that kept them all safe. And Mike would have to stand behind the counter and watch whatever happened next, following the rules that had kept him alive for 7 weeks. Rules he now understood would protect him only as long as he stayed in his place and didn't interfere with the consequences others brought upon themselves. The Crossroads Express wasn't just a gas station. It was a testing ground. And Mike had passed the test by accepting that some questions shouldn't be answered, some customers shouldn't be looked at, and some rules existed for reasons that rationality couldn't explain. He would keep working the overnight shift. He would keep following the protocols. And when Ashley's turn came, he would learn what happened to those who didn't. That was the price of $23 an hour at a crossroads between worlds. Story 3. The Warehouse Walker. Jennifer Mills had worked in logistics for 6 years before landing the security position at the Meridian Fulfillment Center, and she thought she'd seen every kind of workplace weirdness the industry had to offer. She'd dealt with package thieves, shift workers sleeping in bathroom stalls, and one memorable incident involving a forklift in someone's personal vehicle. But nothing in her experience prepared her for the third-floor warehouse or the figure she started seeing on the security cameras during her second week of overnight shifts. The Meridian Fulfillment Center was one of those massive distribution warehouses that had sprung up in the Midwest over the past decade, serving as a regional hub for an online retail giant whose name was contractually forbidden to appear anywhere in employee discussions or documentation. The building covered 12 acres under one roof, with 3 levels of storage, packing stations, and conveyor systems. Jennifer's job was to monitor the security feed from midnight to 8 a.m., making rounds every 2 hours and responding to any alarms or incidents. The pay was solid at $28.50 an hour, and the work was mostly peaceful once the last of the evening shift clocked out at 11 p.m. The building never truly shut down. Automated systems continued sorting packages throughout the night, conveyor belts moving with mechanical precision, robotic shelf units repositioning themselves for the morning shift. But the human presence dropped to almost nothing during Jennifer's hours. Just her, 2 maintenance technicians who handled equipment issues, and occasionally a late-running truck driver dropping off an overnight shipment. The vastness of the building after midnight created an atmosphere that was equal parts peaceful and unsettling. Jennifer's rounds took her through row after row of towering shelves, past dark packing stations where thousands of people worked during the day, through corridors lined with boxes destined for addresses all over the country. The security office itself was located on the ground floor, near the main entrance, equipped with a bank of monitors displaying feeds from over 200 cameras positioned throughout the facility. Jennifer's predecessor, a guy named Thomas, who transferred to day shift after 8 months of overnights, had left detailed notes about each camera's coverage area and a log of common false alarms to ignore. Camera 47 had a faulty motion sensor that triggered constantly. Camera 112's angle created shadows that sometimes looked like movement. Camera 89 had a weird electrical interference that caused static every night around 3 a.m. standard stuff. It was during her 9th overnight shift, a Tuesday bleeding into Wednesday in mid-October, that Jennifer first noticed something off about camera 237. The camera covered a section of the third-floor warehouse, an older area scheduled for renovation in December. The company stored overflow inventory there, items that weren't fast-moving enough to warrant ground-floor positioning, but hadn't been marked for clearance yet. Jennifer was reviewing the previous hour's footage during her 2 a.m. rounds check when she spotted a figure walking through the frame. The timestamp showed 1:47 a.m. The figure appeared from the left side of the screen, walking with purposeful strides between the storage racks. It was a person, definitely human-shaped, wearing what looked like the standard warehouse uniform of dark pants and a company-branded shirt. Jennifer rewound and watched again. The figure walked the same path, appearing from the left, moving right, disappearing off-screen after about 12 seconds. A worker, maybe someone from maintenance checking on something. But why weren't they showing up on the badge-in logs? Jennifer pulled up the access logs for the third floor. According to the system, no one had badged into that section for the past 6 hours. The third floor required a special access level that only senior managers and certain maintenance personnel possessed, and all of them had clocked out by 9 p.m. Jennifer checked the main entrance logs, the loading dock logs, even the emergency exit logs. No unexplained entries or exits. Yet there on camera 237, clear as day, was someone walking through a supposedly empty section of warehouse. She called over to maintenance on the radio. "Hey, this is Jennifer in security. Either of you guys working on the third floor west section?" Static crackled before a voice responded. "Negative. We're both down on the ground floor dealing with a jammed conveyor. Need something?" "Just checking. Thought I saw movement up there on the cameras." "Probably the automated shelf units. They move around on their own for optimization. Freaked me out my first few weeks too." Jennifer thanked him and signed off, but she knew what she'd seen. The automated shelf units were clearly visible on the cameras, rolling on their tracks, repositioning. The figure had been walking on foot, human gait, human proportions. She made a note in her log to check the area during her next round and moved on with her other duties. At 4 a.m., Jennifer made her rounds. She took the freight elevator to the third floor, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The third floor was dimmer than the lower levels, fewer lights to save energy in an area with minimal traffic. Her flashlight beam cut through the shadows as she walked the same path she'd seen the figure take on camera 237. Nothing appeared out of place. Boxes sat on their shelves, inventory numbers matching the system database. No signs of intrusion, no evidence anyone had been there. Jennifer returned to the security office with more questions than answers. The next night, Wednesday to Thursday, Jennifer paid special attention to camera 237. At 2:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour later than the previous night, the figure appeared again. Same path, same purposeful walk, same 12-second journey across the screen. This time Jennifer was ready. She grabbed her radio and called maintenance. "I'm seeing someone on camera 237 again. Third floor west, section G. Can you guys check if maybe there's a manager working late I don't know about?" "There's no one up there," the maintenance tech replied, sounding slightly annoyed. "Seriously, it's just the automated systems. Or maybe a glitch in the camera." But Jennifer was already reviewing the footage from other cameras in the area. Camera 236 should have shown the figure approaching from one angle. Camera 238 should have caught them leaving. She pulled up both feeds, synced the timestamps. On 236 and 238, the aisles were empty. The figure only appeared on camera 237, as if they materialized specifically within that camera's field of view and vanished upon leaving it. Over the next week, Jennifer documented the phenomenon meticulously. Every night, between 2:40 and 2:50 a.m., the figure appeared on camera 237. Always the same path, always the same 12-second walk, never showing up on any other camera or in any access logs. Jennifer tried different approaches to identify the person. She enhanced the footage, but the resolution wasn't high enough to make out facial features. She timed her rounds to arrive on the third floor before the figure's appearance, but when she stood in section G at 2:47 a.m. with the camera in full view, nothing happened. The figure only appeared when she was watching the monitor in the security office. On her 10th consecutive night of observing the pattern, Jennifer noticed something she'd missed before. The figure was carrying something. At first, she'd thought it was just the way the person's arms swung while walking, but frame-by-frame analysis revealed they were clutching something to their chest. A box, maybe? Or a bundle of some kind. Jennifer zoomed in as far as the camera quality allowed. The object looked like a backpack or a bag pressed close to the figure's body as they walked. She pulled up the camera's maintenance history. Camera 237 had been installed 8 years ago during the building's construction. It had been replaced once, 3 years ago, due to normal wear. The camera had no history of malfunctions or anomalies in its logs. Whatever Jennifer was seeing, it wasn't a technical glitch. Something or someone was walking through that section of the warehouse every night at approximately the same time, visible only on one camera, leaving no other trace of their presence. Jennifer's curiosity evolved into an obsession. She started arriving early for her shifts to review historical footage from camera 237. The archive went back 6 months, the limit of the facility's storage capacity. She started from 6 months ago and worked forward. The figure appeared in footage from 6 months ago, 5 months ago, 4 months. Every single night at roughly the same time, the same 12-second walk through Section G. Jennifer's predecessor, Thomas, must have seen this. Why hadn't he mentioned it in his notes? She called Thomas on his cell during her break. They'd exchanged numbers during the transition period. "Hey, it's Jennifer from the fulfillment center. Quick question about the security cameras. Did you ever notice anything weird on camera 237, the third floor west section?" There was a long pause. "Why are you asking about that camera?" "Because I keep seeing someone on it, but they're not showing up on any access logs." "Did you see it too?" Another pause, longer this time. "I saw it. I reported it twice to management. They told me it was a known glitch and to ignore it." When I pressed them about it, they suggested that maybe overnight security wasn't the right fit for me if I was going to get spooked by camera artifacts. That's when I transferred to day shift. But it's not a camera artifact, is it? Thomas sighed. Look, Jennifer, I need this job. I have a family. Whatever is on that camera, management knows about it and doesn't want it investigated. My advice? Log it if you have to for your own peace of mind, but don't push. Don't dig. It's not worth your job. Jennifer thanked him and ended the call, but Thomas's warning only intensified her determination. Someone had died in this building, she became convinced. Someone had died, and the company had covered it up, and now their ghost or echo or whatever walked the same path every night. She needed proof. The facility's employee records were technically accessible to security personnel for badge verification purposes. Jennifer knew she was crossing a line, but late into her 15th night of watching the figure walk across camera 237, she pulled up the personnel database and started searching. She filtered for employees who'd worked at the facility more than 3 years ago, the time when the Section G area had been more active. Then she cross-referenced with termination records. Quit, transferred, quit, terminated for cause, quit. Hundreds of names scrolling past. Nothing jumped out until she filtered further, looking specifically for employees whose last known location had been the 3rd floor. One name stopped her cold. Marcus Webb, warehouse associate, hired 4 years ago. Last shift logged 3 years and 2 months ago. Status, no call, no show. Terminated after 3 days of absence. Last badge in. 3rd floor west, Section G. Last badge out. No record. Marcus Webb had badged into Section G and, according to the system, had never badged out. The timestamp of his last badge in, 2:47 a.m. Jennifer felt her skin prickle. She searched for more information about Marcus Webb. Employee photo pulled up a man in his early 30s, African American, standard company ID photo with that slightly forced smile everyone had in these pictures. No disciplinary history. Performance reviews were average. Nothing to indicate why he would have suddenly stopped showing up for work. She searched local news archives for his name. Nothing. Social media profiles showed accounts that had gone silent 3 years ago. The last post's mundane updates about work and weekend plans. No obituary, no missing person report, no explanation. The company must have done wellness checks, Jennifer reasoned. When an employee no calls for 3 days, HR sends someone to their address. But the personnel file had no notes about any wellness check, no emergency contact notifications, no follow-up of any kind beyond the automated termination after 72 hours of absence. It was as if Marcus Webb had simply vanished from the 3rd floor of the Meridian Fulfillment Center, and nobody had cared enough to investigate. Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. On her next shift, she would go to Section G at 2:47 a.m. and confront whatever or whoever was walking that path. If it was Marcus Webb's ghost, if it was some echo of a tragedy, she would document it. She would make someone acknowledge what had happened. She owed that much to a man who disappeared and been forgotten. Saturday night into Sunday morning, Jennifer prepared. She brought her personal phone with a fully charged battery and sufficient storage for video. She positioned a handheld camera at the security desk to record the monitor showing camera 237's feed. She made her 4 a.m. rounds early, arriving on the 3rd floor at 2:35 a.m., 12 minutes before the figure's usual appearance. She stood in Section G, exactly where camera 237's field of view would capture her, and waited. The warehouse at this hour was a symphony of mechanical sounds. Conveyor belts hummed. Automated shelf units whirred on their tracks. Somewhere in the building, a loading dock door rumbled open. But Section G itself was quiet, almost holding its breath. Jennifer checked her phone. 2:43 a.m. 4 minutes. Her heart rate accelerated despite her attempts to stay calm. This was rational investigation, she told herself, documenting an unexplained phenomenon. Nothing to be afraid of. 2:47 a.m. Jennifer held her phone up, camera recording, sweeping the area. Nothing happened. The aisle remained empty. She checked the security feed on her phone's connection to the office system. On camera 237's monitor, she could see herself standing there with her phone raised, and behind her, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was the figure, walking its usual path. 12 seconds of footage showing the figure passing within feet of where Jennifer stood, while in reality, she stood completely alone. Jennifer spun around. The aisle was empty. She looked back at her phone screen. On camera 237, and the figure had finished its walk and disappeared off screen. Jennifer had been standing in the exact same space, at the exact same time, and had seen nothing. Whatever the figure was, it existed in a different layer of reality, visible only through the camera's lens, present in the recorded past while absent from the physical present. She returned to the security office, her mind racing. The camera wasn't malfunctioning. It was capturing something that had happened, in some event impressed into the fabric of the building itself, playing back every night at the same time. A loop, a recording, a ghost in the digital sense. But why? What had happened to Marcus Webb that left such a powerful imprint? Jennifer spent the rest of her shift digging deeper into the facility's history. She accessed maintenance records from 3 years ago, looking for any incidents around the time of Webb's disappearance. Nothing official. But she found something in the informal notes section, a comment from a technician dated 3 days after Webb's last badge-in. 3rd floor, section G, repaired safety barrier on aisle 14, replaced damaged support beam, expedited at management request. A safety barrier repair, a damaged support beam. Expedited at management request, meaning done quickly and quietly. Jennifer pulled up the facility's incident reports from that period. No injury reports filed. No accident investigations. No OSHA notifications. If something had happened to Marcus Webb, if he'd been injured or killed by a falling beam or a collapsed safety barrier, the company had buried it so deep that no official record remained. She tried one more search, this time in the facility's archived security footage from 3 years ago. The system should have deleted anything older than 6 months, but sometimes data persisted in backup drives that weren't properly purged. Jennifer accessed the backup server and ran a search for camera 237 date range 3 years ago. Most of the footage was gone, but she found fragments, scattered clips that had survived in corrupted sectors of the old drives. One clip, dated the day after Webb's last badge-in, showed section G from a different angle, camera 236. The footage was degraded, pixelated, but Jennifer could make out shapes. A group of people in manager uniforms and maintenance gear, moving quickly, and carrying something heavy wrapped in plastic sheeting. They moved toward the freight elevator. The clip ended. Another clip, same day, different time. A cleaning crew working in section G, industrial equipment visible, the kind used for deep cleaning, the kind used when there's been a biohazard. Jennifer felt sick. Marcus Webb hadn't quit. He hadn't walked away from his job. He died, right there in section G 3 years ago. The company had covered it up, cleaned it up, repaired the evidence, and filed his termination as a voluntary no-show. And every night since, at 2:47 a.m., his final walk played back on camera 237, a digital ghost trapped in an endless loop, carrying whatever he'd been carrying when the accident happened, walking the same 12 seconds of footage forever. She should have left it there. Should have taken Thomas's advice, logged the observation, and moved on. But Jennifer couldn't. She downloaded every piece of evidence she'd found, backed it up to multiple drives, and sent an encrypted email to a local investigative journalist she'd found through a labor rights website. Workplace death covered up at major fulfillment center. Evidence attached. Please investigate. Her final shift at the Meridian Fulfillment Center was the following Wednesday. Jennifer arrived at midnight to find 2 corporate representatives waiting in the security office with her supervisor. They were polite, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. Her access badge had been deactivated. Her personal items had been collected. She was being terminated for violation of data privacy policies, unauthorized access to personnel records, and breach of confidentiality agreements. Legal documents were placed in front of her, NDAs with penalties severe enough to bankrupt her if violated. Severance pay was offered, generous enough to make clear this was a transaction, not a discussion. Jennifer signed everything they put in front of her. She had copies of the evidence in 3 different secure locations. She'd already sent the story to the journalist. But as the corporate representatives escorted her out of the building she'd monitored for 3 weeks, she looked back at the massive warehouse and felt a wave of defeat. Marcus Webb was still in there, still walking his 12-second loop every night at 2:47 a.m., and nothing Jennifer had done would bring him justice. The journalist never ran the story. When Jennifer followed up a week later, the response was apologetic but firm. Insufficient evidence, unwilling to pursue without corroboration, legal concerns about making accusations against a major corporation. The email attachments Jennifer had sent were missing from the thread, somehow deleted or corrupted during transmission. Jennifer tried other journalists, filed complaints with OSHA and the Labor Board, posted anonymously to social media. Nothing gained traction. The story vanished into the void of ignored whistleblowers and buried corporate scandals. 6 months later, Jennifer was working security at a small office complex, making $18 an hour when she received a package. No return address, delivered by a courier service that had no record of who paid for the delivery. Inside was a USB drive and a printed note. "You tried to help. That matters. M.W." Jennifer plugged the drive into her laptop, hands shaking. It contained security footage from camera 237, but not the same 12-second loop she'd seen countless times. This was new footage, dated the previous night. The figure appeared at 2:47 a.m. as always, walking the same path. But this time, at the end of the 12 seconds, the figure stopped, turned toward the camera, raised one hand in what could have been a wave or a salute, and then, for the first time in 3 years, the figure walked off-screen in a different direction, breaking the loop, like the pattern finally disrupted. On the USB drive below the video file was a single document, Marcus Webb's death certificate, official and notarized, dated 3 years ago. Cause of death: blunt force trauma from industrial accident. Signed by a medical examiner, countersigned by facility management, filed with the county clerk. Someone, somewhere inside the system, had made sure there was a record, had made sure Marcus Webb existed beyond the 12-second loop, had sent it to the one person who'd tried to tell his story. Jennifer never learned who sent the package. She kept the USB drive in a safety deposit box, evidence that might someday matter if the right opportunity arose. She thought about Marcus Webb often, wondered if whatever consciousness or energy had been trapped in that loop had finally found peace, wondered if her failed attempt to expose the truth had somehow mattered anyway. The Meridian Fulfillment Center still operates. They're running 3 shifts, processing thousands of packages daily. New security guards monitor the cameras, including camera 237. Some of them notice the figure walking through Section G at 2:47 a.m. Most ignore it, dismissing it as a glitch or a trick of the lighting. A few ask questions, get reassigned or let go, learn the same lesson Jennifer learned. The warehouse keeps its secrets, and the only ghosts that matter are the ones the company acknowledges. But Jennifer knows different. She knows that Marcus Webb walked that warehouse every night for 3 years, a digital ghost carrying evidence of his own death, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. She knows that she tried, and even though she failed, even though the system crushed her attempt to expose the truth, for 12 seconds on a random night 6 months after she was fired, Marcus Webb broke his loop and walked a different path. Sometimes that has to be enough. And sometimes bearing witness is the only justice the forgotten ever receive. And sometimes, in the vast warehouses where workers are numbers and efficiency is everything, the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to forget the ones who disappeared. Story 4. Drive-through protocol. The laminated card taped to the cash register at the Burger Queen on Route 9 looked like standard operating procedure at first glance. The kind of corporate-mandated rules that covered everything from hand-washing frequency to how many seconds the fries should stay in the oil. But buried between the refund policy and the closing checklist was one rule that didn't fit the pattern. Rule number 7, written in slightly darker ink than the others, as if it had been added later. If the same vehicle orders through drive-through twice in a single shift, they call police immediately using code phrase, "We have a drive-off situation." Do not explain further to the customer. Do not delay the call. 17-year-old Kyle Martinez noticed the rule during his first solo overnight shift, but didn't think much of it. He figured it was some insurance thing, maybe fraud prevention for people trying to scam free food by claiming they never received an order. The Burger Queen franchise sat on a lonely stretch of state highway between two towns that each claimed to be bigger than they actually were, and the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. attracted exactly the kind of customers you'd expect. Truckers needing a coffee boost, shift workers grabbing dinner on their way home or breakfast on their way in, and the occasional group of teenagers looking for somewhere to kill time after parties or movies. Kyle's manager, a perpetually exhausted woman named Sharon, who'd worked at this location for 14 years, had gone over the rules during his training week. She'd tapped the laminated card with one finger, her nail making a clicking sound against the plastic coating. "Follow these exactly," she'd said, "especially Rule 7. If a car comes through twice, you call the police using that exact phrase. Don't ask why. Don't try to handle it yourself. Just make the call." "What if it's just someone who forgot something?" Kyle had asked. "Like they ordered, drive around, realize they wanted extra sauce or whatever?" Sharon's expression had gone flat, unreadable. "Won't happen. Trust me. In 14 years, I've only seen Rule 7 trigger 3 times, and all 3 times I followed the protocol exactly. You will too if you want to keep working here." The tone had been so final, so serious, that Kyle dropped the subject. He needed the job. His mom's cancer treatments were expensive, even with insurance, and every dollar he made went into the medical fund. Overnight shift at Burger Queen paid an extra $2 an hour over the day rate, and Sharon let him work as many hours as his school schedule allowed. If the rule said call the police for repeat customers, he'd call the police for repeat customers. Simple. His first 3 weeks of solo overnight shifts passed in a blur of burger assembly, drive-through headset announcements, and the particular exhaustion that came from being awake when the body desperately wanted to sleep. Kyle developed a routine. The dinner rush, such as it was, ran from 10 p.m. to about 1 a.m. After that, business dropped to maybe 1 or 2 customers an hour until the breakfast crowd started trickling in around 5:30. He used the slow hours to clean, restock, and work on homework assignments, balanced on the counter between orders. It was his 4th Friday night, yet technically early Saturday morning at 1:15 a.m., when Kyle processed an order that would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. The headset crackled to life with a male voice, calm and measured. "I'll have a number 4 combo, no pickles, large Coke, and a small fries on the side." "Sure thing. That'll be $8.47. Pull around to the window, please." A black sedan appeared in Kyle's peripheral vision as it rounded the building toward the pickup window. Nothing remarkable about it. A newer model Toyota or Honda, something common and forgettable. Kyle couldn't see the driver clearly through the tinted windows. The car pulled up, and the driver's window lowered just enough to pass cash through the gap. Kyle caught a glimpse of a white male, maybe 30s or 40s, wearing a baseball cap. The hand that extended with a $10 bill looked normal. Clean fingernails, no distinctive jewelry or tattoos. Kyle made change, handed over the bag and drink, and offered his standard, "Have a good night." The window rolled up, the sedan pulled away, and Kyle went back to wiping down counters. He marked the time in the mental log he kept of shift activities. 1:21 a.m., 1 car, routine transaction. The night continued its slow progression toward sunrise. At 3:40 a.m., Kyle was refilling the napkin dispensers when the drive-through alert chimed. He walked to his position at the window and put on the headset. The voice came through, identical in cadence and tone to the one he'd heard over 2 hours earlier. "I'll have a number 4 combo, no pickles, large Coke, and a small fries on the side." Kyle's hand froze on the register. Same order exactly, word for word. The same voice, he was almost certain. Sure, that's $8.47. Pull around, please." His mind was racing as he bagged the order. Could be a coincidence. Plenty of people ordered the same thing regularly. But the voice had been identical. Not just similar, but identical, down to the slight pause before large Coke. The black sedan appeared, rounding the building. Same car or an identical one. Kyle felt his pulse quicken. Rule 7. If the same vehicle orders twice. The car pulled to the window. Same tinted windows, same lowering of the driver's window just enough to pass payment. The same baseball-capped figure, the same hand extending a $10 bill. Everything was identical to the transaction from 1:21 a.m., like a scene being replayed from a recording. Kyle's training kicked in. Don't explain further to the customer. Don't delay the call. He took the $10 bill, his hands trembling slightly. Just one moment, sir. Let me grab your change. Kyle stepped away from the window, reaching for the phone mounted on the wall behind the counter. His eyes never left the sedan, which idled at the window, engine running. He dialed 911, and when the operator answered, but he recited the exact phrase from the rule card. This is Burger Queen on Route 9. We have a drive-off situation. There was no pause, no request for clarification. The operator's response was immediate. Units are responding. Stay on the line. Do not engage with the vehicle. Confirm you are safe inside the building. Yes, I'm inside. The customer is at the drive-through window. How long ago did the vehicle arrive at your window? Kyle checked the order timer on the screen. About 45 seconds. Officers are 90 seconds out. Keep the customer at the window if possible without putting yourself at risk. Kyle turned back to the window, still holding the phone. The sedan sat there, waiting for change, waiting for food. 90 seconds. He could stall that long. Sorry about the wait. Register is being slow. Kyle fumbled with making change, deliberately dropping coins, taking time to recount. Through the phone, he could hear the operator coordinating with the responding units. Unit 12, Route 9 eastbound. Unit 15, Route 9 westbound. Intercept formation, Code 47. Code 47. Kyle had no idea what that meant, but the operator's tone suggested something urgent, something serious beyond a simple drive-off theft. The sedan continued idling. 60 seconds since Kyle had called. 30 more to go. He bagged the food slowly, putting in extra napkins, checking to make sure the order was complete with exaggerated care. The car window remained partially lowered, the driver's face still mostly obscured by the baseball cap and the angle of the window. Headlights appeared on Route 9 from both directions simultaneously. 2 police cruisers approaching fast, no sirens but light bars flashing. The moment the sedan's driver noticed them, Kyle saw the head turn sharply left, then right, tracking the approaching vehicles. Everything happened at once. The sedan's engine revved, tires squealed, and the car lurched forward, abandoning the transaction. But the police had positioned perfectly. Both cruisers swerved to block the exit lanes from the parking lot, boxing the sedan in. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands Kyle couldn't fully hear through the glass. "Get down on the ground," Kyle heard the operator say through the phone. "Behind the counter, now." Kyle dropped, his heart hammering, the phone still pressed to his ear. Through the lower section of the drive-through window, he could see the scene unfolding. The sedan had stopped, surrounded. Its driver's door opened, and the figure in the baseball cap stepped out with hands raised, more shouting from the officers. The figure complied, getting on the ground, hands behind the head. Officers swarmed, handcuffing the driver, searching the vehicle. One officer approached the sedan's trunk. Kyle watched as the officer popped it open, looked inside, and immediately keyed his radio with what looked like an urgent transmission. More officers converged on the trunk. Someone was calling for an ambulance, for additional units, for a supervisor. The officer who'd opened the trunk turned away and bent at the waist, and Kyle realized with horror that the man was being sick, right there in the parking lot. "Are you still there?" the operator asked. "Yes, what's happening? What did they find?" "Stay where you are. An officer will come inside to speak with you shortly. You did exactly what you were supposed to do." It took 20 minutes before an officer entered the Burger Queen. Kyle had stayed behind the counter, watching through the window as more police arrived, as crime scene tape went up, as what looked like every emergency vehicle in the county congregated in the parking lot. The officer who finally came inside was a woman, maybe mid-40s, with a name tag that read, Sergeant Paulson. She looked exhausted and angry in equal measure. "You're the one who called it in?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I just followed the rule we have. Rule 7 on the card." Sergeant Paulson nodded. "That rule has been in place at this location for 6 years. Do you know why?" Kyle shook his head. 6 years ago, we had a serial case working this stretch of highway. Someone abducting women from rest stops, gas stations, places open late along Route 9. Took us 4 months to identify the pattern. The suspect would establish an alibi by making a purchase at a business with time-stamped receipts while his victim was still alive. Then he'd drive to a secondary location, kill the victim, and return to the same business to make an identical purchase. Second receipt would timestamp the return trip, and when we'd initially investigate, he'd have receipts showing he was at Burger Queen or whatever at the exact time of death. It took us too long to realize he was using the same businesses twice. Kyle felt his stomach drop. The car that was just here had a woman in the trunk, still alive, thank God, though she's in bad shape. You calling when you did, us getting here before he left the lot, you saved her life. If he'd driven away, established his timeline, we might not have found her in time. How did you get here so fast? I called at 3:41. You were here by 3:43. Sergeant Paulson's expression was grim. When that code phrase comes from this location, every available unit in the county responds. We've had protocols in place for 6 years, waiting for this guy to try it again. He did 6 years ago, got away clean because the employee didn't call it in, didn't realize what they were seeing. That victim didn't survive. Corporate worked with us to implement the rule, train employees. You're the first person to actually trigger it since the protocols were put in place. Kyle looked out at the parking lot, at the black sedan surrounded by police vehicles, at the ambulance loading a stretcher. The guy 6 years ago, you caught him? No. He went quiet after we started the education campaign with late-night businesses. We thought maybe he'd moved on, or stopped, or died. Turns out he was just being patient, waiting for people to forget, for protocols to get sloppy. Paulson looked at Kyle with something approaching respect. You followed the rule exactly, didn't try to be a hero, didn't hesitate, didn't question it. That's what saved her. The rest of Kyle's shift was a blur of police interviews, written statements, and waiting while crime scene technicians processed the parking lot. Sharon arrived at 5 a.m., 2 hours before her usual start time, summoned by corporate after they were notified of the incident. She took one look at Kyle and pulled him into a hug that was entirely unprofessional and exactly what he needed. You did good, she said. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. The story made regional news within hours. Fast food employee helps catch serial killer ran on every local station. Kyle's name was kept out of the initial reports at his request, though it eventually leaked through social media. The man in the black sedan was identified as Gerald Pritchard, 42, a long-haul truck driver with no criminal record and a wife and 2 kids in a neighboring state. He'd been questioned briefly during the original investigation 6 years ago and cleared for lack of evidence. The woman in the trunk, Sarah Chen, 28, survived and eventually testified at Pritchard's trial. What the news didn't report, what Kyle only learned weeks later through Sergeant Paulson, was that they'd found evidence in Pritchard's garage of 6 other victims over the past 8 years. Women who disappeared along Route 9 and nearby highways, cases that had gone cold, families that had never gotten answers. The drive-through receipts had been part of Pritchard's method from the beginning, a way to create a documented timeline that placed him at public businesses during windows when investigators believed the murders occurred. He'd refined the technique over years, and it had worked perfectly until Kyle had followed a rule he didn't fully understand. The Burger Queen franchise offered Kyle a substantial raise and a transfer to day shift if he wanted it. He declined both. The overnight shift paid better, and his mother's treatments were ongoing. But corporate did update the training materials for all locations across the region, making Rule 7 mandatory education for every employee. The laminated cards were reprinted with Rule 7 in bold, highlighted text. Sharon told Kyle that the rule was now called the Kyle Protocol in internal memos, though that wasn't official. 3 months after the incident, Kyle received a letter from Sarah Chen. It was handwritten, several pages long, thanking him for saving her life. She described what she remembered of the abduction, the terror of being trapped in the trunk, the moment she heard police sirens and knew she might survive. She told him she was back in school, working toward a degree in criminal justice, planning to dedicate her career to helping other victims. She wrote that she thought about him every day, this teenage kid working a late-night shift who'd made one phone call that changed everything. Kyle kept the letter in his locker at work. On the hardest nights, when exhaustion made his eyes blur and the hours stretched impossibly long, he'd read it during his break, remembering that sometimes following the rules, even when you don't understand them, like even when they seem arbitrary or paranoid, sometimes that matters in ways you can't imagine. The black sedan had come through the drive-thru twice in a single shift, and Kyle had called the police using the code phrase, and Sarah Chen was alive because of it. Rule 7 existed because someone, somewhere, had learned a terrible lesson, and had decided that no employee should ever have to learn it the same way. The protocol had been built on tragedy, refined through near misses, waiting for the moment when it would save a life instead of just documenting a death. Kyle Martinez worked the overnight shift at Burger Queen on Route 9 for 2 more years, putting himself through community college and then university on a combination of wages, scholarships, and the reward money that Sarah Chen insisted he accept. He eventually became a police officer himself, working the same county where he'd made that phone call, carrying the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of following procedure could mean the difference between life and death. And every fast food worker who trained under the updated protocols learned Rule 7, learned the Kyle Protocol, learned that if the same vehicle ordered twice in a single shift, you called the police immediately. No questions asked. Because Gerald Pritchard was in prison for life. But the world had other predators. Other people who thought they were smarter than the system, who thought they could use ordinary businesses as props in their terrible plays. Rule 7 stood as a reminder that sometimes the rules that seem strangest are the ones that matter most. That protocols written in the aftermath of horror are written in something darker and more permanent than ink. And that a 17-year-old kid working a midnight shift at a burger joint could be the difference between a family getting their daughter back and another name added to the list of the missing and presumed dead. The laminated card stayed on the wall behind the register at the Burger Queen on Route 9. Rule 7 highlighted in yellow, a small memorial to the woman who died before the protocol existed, and a tribute to the one who survived because someone finally followed it exactly as written. Story 5. The third floor rounds. Claire Morrison had been a registered nurse for 12 years before taking the overnight position at Whispering Pines Extended Care Facility, and in those 12 years she'd seen more than her share of death. Hospitals, hospice wards, home care for terminal patients. She'd held hands with people taking their last breaths. She'd called time of death. She'd cleaned and prepared bodies for the morgue. Death, Claire had learned, was a process like any other, clinical in its mechanics even when profound in its meaning. The human body shut down in predictable stages. The living became the deceased through measurable steps. There was sadness, yes, but also a kind of rhythm to it, a pattern Claire had learned to navigate with compassion and professionalism. Whispering Pines was different from the start, though Claire couldn't articulate exactly how. The facility was a 3-story building on the outskirts of a town that had seen better days economically, serving as long-term care for elderly patients with advanced dementia, Alzheimer's, and other cognitive disorders that made home care impossible. The first and second floors housed patients in various stages of decline, some still mobile and conversational, others bedridden and mostly non-responsive. The third floor, where Claire was assigned for the overnight shift, housed the facility's most advanced cases. Patients who no longer recognized family, who couldn't perform basic self-care, who existed in that tragic space between life and whatever came after. Claire's shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and her primary responsibility was making rounds every 2 hours, checking on each patient, administering medications, and responding to any emergencies. The third floor had 22 patients distributed among 20 rooms, most of them in private rooms, though a few shared doubles. The floor was always quiet at night, the only sounds coming from medical equipment beeping, the occasional call bell, and the soft footsteps of Claire's orthopedic shoes on the linoleum. Her first week, Claire noticed something odd about room 3B. Every patient in that room, regardless of who was placed there, would ask her the same question during night rounds. "Did you see the doctor?" It started with Mrs. Patterson, a 91-year-old woman with advanced Alzheimer's who barely spoke most days. When Claire entered at 1 a.m. during her first night rounds, Mrs. Patterson had looked directly at her with unusual clarity and asked, "Did you see the doctor?" "There's no doctor here at night, honey," Claire had responded gently. "I'm the nurse. Do you need something?" Mrs. Patterson's expression had shifted back to its usual confusion, and she'd settled back into her pillows without further comment. Claire had noted it as a moment of brief lucidity, common enough in dementia patients, and moved on with her rounds. But then Mr. Chen in 3B asked the same question 2 nights later. "Did you see the doctor?" And Mrs. Washington the night after that. Always patients in room 3B, always the same question, usually asked around 1 a.m. during Claire's first round. Claire checked the records. Room 3B had no history of increased doctor visits, no particular medical specialty assigned to it. Nothing in the room's history explained why patients there would fixate on a doctor. Claire asked the day shift nurses about it during a shift change meeting. Sandra, who'd worked at Whispering Pines for 6 years, got a strange look on her face. "Third-floor patients ask weird things sometimes," she said, not quite meeting Claire's eyes. "The dementia, you know. They get fixated. Don't let it bother you." But it did bother Claire, especially when the question evolved. By her 3rd week, patients in other rooms had started asking it too. Room 3A, 3C, 3D. "Did you see the doctor?" became the chorus of her 1 a.m. rounds. Sometimes asked by patients who hadn't spoken in days, sometimes whispered with an urgency that suggested fear rather than confusion. Then Claire started noticing the patient's behavior changing as she approached 1 a.m. The 3rd floor, which was typically quiet during overnight hours, would become agitated. Call bells would ring from multiple rooms simultaneously. Patients who were normally bedridden would be found sitting up in their beds, staring at their doors. One night, Claire found every ambulatory patient on the floor standing at their doorways, looking into the hallway, watching for something. "What are we looking for?" Claire had asked Mrs. Patterson, who was gripping her doorframe with trembling hands. "The doctor," Mrs. Patterson had whispered. "He makes his rounds at 1 o'clock. Nay, he always makes his rounds." Claire had gently guided the patients back to bed, chalking it up to some kind of collective delusion, the way nursing home residents sometimes fed off each other's confusion. But the pattern persisted. Every night, starting around 12:45 a.m., the 3rd floor would wake up. Patients would become alert, anxious, waiting, and they would ask about the doctor. It was during her 6th week that Claire first saw him. She was conducting her 1 a.m. rounds, she moving down the hallway with her medication cart when she glanced toward the far end of the corridor. A figure in white was walking away from her, moving from room to room in the same pattern Claire followed. The figure wore what looked like a doctor's coat, old-fashioned and longer than the modern lab coats physicians wore. From behind, Claire could see it was a man, tall, thin, with a distinctive rolling gait that suggested someone walking on tired feet after a long shift. "Excuse me," Claire called out. "Can I help you find someone?" The figure didn't respond, didn't turn around. It continued its methodical progression, entering room 3G, pausing for what seemed like an examination, then exiting and moving to 3H. Claire walked faster, trying to catch up. The hallway wasn't that long. She should have been able to reach him in seconds. But every time she got close, the figure would be 1 room ahead, just out of clear visual range. By the time Claire reached the end of the hallway, the figure had vanished. She checked every room, looked in supply closets, searched the stairwell. Nothing. No doctor, no explanation for who the figure had been or where he'd gone. Claire checked the sign-in log at the nurses' station. No doctors had been on the 3rd floor that night. No visitors had been admitted. She'd been alone on the floor except for the patients. The next night, Claire positioned herself with a clear view down the entire hallway at 12:45 a.m. She watched, barely blinking, as 1 o'clock approached. At 12:58 a.m., the figure appeared. Not from the stairwell, not from the elevator, but simply materialized at the far end of the hallway, as if stepping out of a fold in reality itself. The white coat, the distinctive walk, the methodical progression from room to room. This time, Claire could see more details. The coat was indeed old-fashioned, probably from the 1960s based on the cut and length. The figure wore a surgical mask, the kind that tied behind the head, though there was no medical reason for it during normal rounds. And there was something wrong with the way he moved, a jerky quality to his motions, like a film skipping frames. Claire didn't call out this time. She simply watched, documenting what she was seeing with a clinical eye. The figure spent approximately 30 seconds in each room, always entering through the doorway, never turning on lights, never making sounds. Patients who'd been agitated before his arrival would settle down after he visited their rooms, lying back in their beds, closing their eyes. The figure worked his way down the hallway, getting closer to where Claire stood at the nurse's station. She realized with mounting dread that he would eventually reach her position, would have to acknowledge her or pass by her or something. And when the figure reached room 3D, 2 rooms away from the nurse's station, Claire made a decision. She stepped directly into the hallway, blocking the path. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What are you doing in my ward?" The figure completed its visit to room 3D and exited into the hallway. It stood there 10 feet from Claire, and for the first time, she got a clear look at what was beneath the surgical mask. Or rather, what wasn't beneath it. The mask sat against a face that was wrong, sunken in places, hollow in others, with skin that had the gray-yellow tinge of advanced decomposition. The eyes behind the mask were clouded, milky white, seeing nothing. This wasn't a living doctor making rounds. This was something else wearing a doctor's clothing like a costume, performing a ritual it had performed so many times, the pattern had outlasted death itself. The figure didn't acknowledge Claire. It moved past her, so close she could smell something chemical and wrong, like formaldehyde mixed with decay, and continued its rounds. Claire stood frozen as it visited the remaining rooms, including the nurse's station area where Claire had patient charts spread out. The figure didn't disturb anything, didn't interact with the physical world except in the act of walking. When it completed its rounds at the last room, room 3V, it walked back down the hallway toward where it had first appeared. And then, when at the exact spot where it had materialized, it simply ceased to exist, fading like morning mist, until Claire was staring at an empty hallway. She should have reported it, should have told her supervisor, filed some kind of incident report, done something official and professional. Instead, Claire did what any reasonable person would do when confronted with the impossible. She researched. She spent her breaks and days off digging into the history of Whispering Pines Extended Care Facility, looking for any explanation for what she was witnessing. The building, she learned, had been constructed in 1958 as Whispering Pines Sanitarium, a facility for treating tuberculosis patients during the tail end of that epidemic. The 3rd floor had been the quarantine ward, where the most infectious patients were isolated. Treatment in that era had been brutal by modern standards. Patients confined to beds for months, subjected to experimental medications, often dying alone without family contact due to infection protocols. The sanitarium had closed in 1966 when TB treatments improved and the facility was no longer needed. It had sat empty for 3 years before being converted into an extended care facility. Claire found a local history archive that had photographs from the sanitarium era. Group photos of staff, mostly nurses in white uniforms and caps, standing in front of the building. And there, in a 1963 photograph, she found him. Dr. James Whitmore. The caption read, "Chief Physician, Tuberculosis Ward." The man in the photo wore a white doctor's coat and stood with the distinctive posture Claire had seen in the hallway figure. The photo showed him wearing a surgical mask, standard for TB wards in that era. His eyes, visible above the mask, looked exhausted, haunted by what he'd witnessed. More research revealed Dr. Whitmore's fate. He died in 1965, not from tuberculosis, but from a heart attack. He collapsed in the 3rd floor hallway during his evening rounds at approximately 1 a.m. He'd been found by a night nurse, dead for several hours, still clutching his patient charts. The article Claire found described him as dedicated to the point of obsession. often working 18-hour shifts, refusing to leave patients even when ordered to rest. He'd apparently felt personally responsible for every patient death, had kept meticulous records of symptoms and treatments, searching for any combination that might save the people under his care. Dr. Whitmore had made his rounds at 1 a.m. every night for 7 years, checked on every patient, noted their conditions, adjusted their treatments, and apparently, 60 years after his death, he was still making those rounds, still checking on patients, still performing the duty he'd carried until his heart gave out in the same hallway where Claire now worked. Over the following weeks, Claire developed a strange routine around the 1 a.m. phenomenon. She'd position herself to observe but not interfere as Dr. Whitmore's ghost or echo or whatever it was made its rounds. She noticed patterns in how patients responded. Those who were most agitated before the doctor's visit would be calmer after, as if his presence, even in this spectral form, provided some comfort. Patients who asked, "Did you see the doctor?" would nod and smile when Claire confirmed that yes, the doctor had made his rounds. Claire started thinking of Dr. Whitmore not as a haunting, but as a colleague, another healthcare worker doing his job across whatever barrier separated the living from the dead. She'd nod respectfully when he passed her in the hallway. She'd make sure to complete her own rounds slightly before 1 a.m. so she wouldn't interfere with his. And she noticed something remarkable. Patients on the 3rd floor, despite their advanced conditions, and despite the terminal nature of their illnesses, seemed more peaceful than dementia patients she'd cared for in other facilities. Their final days, however confused or diminished, carried less fear. It was during her 4th month at Whispering Pines that Claire had a direct interaction with the phenomenon that changed her understanding completely. Mrs. Patterson, the first patient who'd asked about the doctor, had been declining rapidly over the previous week. Her breathing had become labored, her periods of lucidity shorter and less frequent. Claire knew the signs. Mrs. Patterson was approaching her final hours. At 11:30 p.m., Mrs. Patterson's condition deteriorated sharply. Claire called the family, administered comfort medications, and settled in to monitor the situation. By 12:45 a.m., Mrs. Patterson's breathing had taken on the distinctive rattle that often preceded death. Claire held her hand, speaking softly, providing what comfort she could. The clock on the wall ticked toward 1 a.m. Dr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway at exactly 1 o'clock, right on schedule. But this time, instead of his usual cursory 30-second visit, he entered the room fully and approached Mrs. Patterson's bedside. He stood on the opposite side of the bed from Claire, and for the first time, Claire saw his hands emerge from the coat sleeves. They were gray, skeletal, but they moved with purpose as he performed a phantom examination, checking vitals that his incorporeal form couldn't truly assess, going through motions he'd performed thousands of times. Then Dr. Whitmore did something he'd never done before. He looked directly at Claire. Those milky, dead eyes focused on her, and Claire heard a voice in her mind rather than her ears. "She's ready. I'll help her cross." Mrs. Patterson's eyes, which had been closed, fluttered open. She looked not at Claire, but at Dr. Whitmore. "Doctor," she said, her voice clear and lucid for the first time in weeks. "Am I dying?" The phantom doctor nodded, and again Claire heard his voice in her mind. "Yes, but you won't be alone. I'll walk with you just like I've walked with all the others." Mrs. Patterson smiled, a peaceful expression that transformed her lined face. "I'm ready," she said. She squeezed Claire's hand once, then released it. Her breathing, which had been struggling and desperate, eased. Dr. Whitmore reached out his spectral hand, and Mrs. Patterson, somehow, took it. Claire watched in awe as Mrs. Patterson sat up, not her physical body, which remained in the bed, but something else, some essential part of her that could interact with the dead doctor. The two figures walked toward the doorway together, Dr. Whitmore supporting Mrs. Patterson the way a physician might help a patient take their first steps after a long illness. They paused at the threshold. Dr. Whitmore looked back at Claire one final time. His voice in her mind was gentle, tired, but satisfied. "I couldn't save them then. TB took so many, but I can help them now, at the end. Every one of them, I walk them through." It's the only treatment I have left to offer." Then they were gone, faded into whatever existed beyond Claire's perception. In the bed, Mrs. Patterson's physical body took one last peaceful breath and went still. Claire checked for a pulse, found none, and called the time of death at 1:07 a.m. Mrs. Patterson's face held that same peaceful smile. Claire understood then what was happening on the third floor. Dr. Whitmore was still making his rounds, still checking on patients, but his purpose had evolved. He wasn't trying to cure them or treat their physical ailments. He was preparing them for the transition he'd learned to navigate when his own heart stopped in this hallway 60 years ago. The patients asked, "Did you see the doctor?" because they could sense what Claire had now witnessed. That death on the third floor came with a guide, a physician who'd walked that path himself and refused to let his patients make the journey alone. Over the remaining months Claire worked at Whispering Pines, she witnessed Dr. Whitmore's final rounds with 14 more patients. Each time followed the same pattern. The patient would decline, reach their final hours, and at 1 a.m. Dr. Whitmore would appear to help them cross whatever threshold separated life from death. The patients always seemed to recognize him, always seemed comforted by his presence, even though the living staff could barely perceive him. Claire began to see her role differently. She was providing physical comfort, medical care, and human connection. Dr. Whitmore was providing something else, something medical school didn't teach, but that seemed just as essential. Claire never told her colleagues what she witnessed. How could she? The day shift nurses already thought the third floor was strange, already made comments about how much calmer the overnight patients seemed compared to the other floors. But they didn't see what Claire saw, didn't feel what she felt. And maybe that was intentional. Maybe Dr. Whitmore only appeared to those who worked the hours he'd worked, who understood the particular exhaustion and dedication of overnight medical care. 2 years into her position at Whispering Pines, Claire was offered a promotion to a supervisory role on the day shift, better hours, better pay, a normal schedule that would let her have a social life again. She declined it. Her place was on the third floor, working nights, serving as the living counterpart to a dead physician who'd never stopped caring for his patients. Together, she and Dr. Whitmore provided a kind of comprehensive care that bridged the gap between medical treatment and whatever came after treatment failed. The patients continued to ask, "Did you see the doctor?" And Claire continued to answer yes, knowing they were asking about something real, something important, something that made their final days in a dementia ward less frightening. And at 1 a.m. every night, like clockwork, Dr. James Whitmore made his rounds on the third floor of the building that had once been a tuberculosis sanitarium, checking on patients, adjusting treatments only he could administer, and helping the dying take their first steps into whatever waited beyond. Claire Morrison learned what every good nurse eventually learns, that care doesn't end when treatment options run out, that presence matters even when medicine fails, and that sometimes the best healthcare workers are the ones who never left their posts, who continued their duties long after their shift should have ended, who understood that healing came in many forms and dying patients needed doctors just as much as living ones. The third floor rounds continued night after night, a partnership between the living and the dead in service of patients who needed both. If you enjoyed these stories, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying true night shift horror experiences. Have your own disturbing overnight shift story? Share it in the comments below. Your experience might be featured in a future episode. And remember, the next time you work an overnight shift, pay attention to the patterns, follow the protocols, and never dismiss something as impossible just because you can't explain it. The night shift reveals truths that daylight hides. Stay safe out there, night workers, and always, always follow the rules.